My name is Ariana, and I am 27 years old. My sister, Vanessa, was always the golden child, straight-A student, law degree, perfect fiancé from a wealthy family. And me? I was the disappointment who chose the military over college, the one who didn't fit in. She never let me forget it. When she got engaged, she made it clear that I'd be a bridesmaid if I behaved. I tried to take it in stride. Family comes first, right? But when I saw the dress she picked for me, my stomach dropped. I can still remember standing in that overpriced bridal boutique, surrounded by racks of delicate fabrics and pastel silks that shimmered under soft lighting. The air smelled faintly of roses and perfume, and my sister stood in front of a mirror, glowing in her designer gown. She looked beautiful, ethereal even, but her beauty had always been sharp-edged, weaponized. Every detail of the wedding had been crafted to showcase her perfection. Her fiancé's family's money, her slim figure, her picture-perfect life. And me? I was the accessory she had to include, the imperfect sister who didn't fit the aesthetic. The saleswoman handed me the garment bag with a polite, overly bright smile. "This one's for you," she said, glancing nervously at Vanessa, who was already barking orders at another bridesmaid. When I unzipped the bag and saw the fabric inside, I froze. The brown was so dull it almost looked gray under the lights, like dried earth after a storm. The cut was unforgiving, boxy, and unflattering in all the wrong places. The neckline was uneven, the straps awkwardly thin. And, to make it worse, it was at least 2 sizes smaller than my measurements, deliberately chosen, I was sure. I slipped into the dressing room, my fingers trembling slightly as I tried to pull the zipper up. It wouldn't go past my ribcage. I stared at myself in the mirror, the dress wrinkled, tight, and wrong. My reflection looked like a joke. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the sting of realization. This wasn't an accident. Vanessa had planned this. She'd chosen this hideous color, this impossible fit, knowing full well it would make me look ridiculous standing next to her pastel-perfect bridal party. When I stepped out of the fitting room, she turned, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. That smirk tugged at her lips, the one I knew too well. It wasn't joy or amusement. It was satisfaction. "Oh, it's perfect for you," she said, drawing out the words as if tasting them. The other bridesmaids, her college friends with manicured nails and polished smiles, exchanged glances but stayed quiet. No one dared to challenge her. Vanessa had that effect on people. I looked down at myself again. The fabric clung uncomfortably to my waist, emphasizing everything I usually kept neatly in control. I thought of my uniform, crisp, dignified, earned through sweat and discipline. This brown mess felt like mockery in comparison. I forced a small smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's fine," I said softly. Vanessa tilted her head, pretending concern. "Oh, I know it's not really your style, but I just thought something earthy would suit you. You know, simple, practical." The word stung more than I wanted to admit. Simple. That was her polite way of saying plain. And practical was her code for beneath her. Mom was there, too, sitting on a nearby couch, flipping through a bridal magazine, pretending not to notice. She hated conflict, especially between us. I caught her eye, silently pleading for her to say something, anything, but she just gave me a weak smile and said, "You look lovely, sweetheart." I could tell she didn't believe it either. The rest of the fitting blurred together. Vanessa twirled in front of the mirror while the saleswoman gushed over her beauty, and her friends giggled about the bachelorette weekend in Paris that I hadn't been invited to. I stood in the background, tugging at the hem of that awful dress, feeling like an intruder in my own family. When we finally left the boutique, Vanessa linked arms with me, her perfume strong and sweet. "I'm so glad you're part of this, Ari," she said, her voice dripping with false affection. "It means a lot to me that you're here, even though, you know, your career keeps you so busy." There it was again, the jab hidden inside the compliment. She never missed a chance to remind me that my life didn't fit into her world of charity luncheons and luxury handbags. I had mud on my boots, calluses on my hands, and medals in my drawer, none of which she valued. To her, I was the family embarrassment dressed up in khaki. That night, I hung the brown dress on my closet door and just stared at it. The fabric caught the dim light, dull and lifeless. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn her approval, the birthdays she forgot, the times she introduced me to her friends as my sister, the soldier with a laugh, like I was some novelty. It was always this way, her on the pedestal, me in the shadow. But that evening, as the house grew quiet, something inside me shifted. The humiliation burned, but underneath it was a spark, something sharper, steadier. I didn't know it yet, but that brown dress would be the last time Vanessa ever got to define who I was. Because no matter how hard she tried to make me small, I had already earned something she could never fake: respect. And one way or another, she was about to learn what that truly looked like. That night before the wedding, sleep never came. I lay awake in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, my mind spinning in circles. The brown dress hung from the closet door like a silent reminder of everything Vanessa thought I was: dull, inferior, expendable. Every stitch of that cheap fabric felt like an insult. My eyes kept drifting toward the small wooden box on the dresser, the one holding my medals. I hadn't opened it in months. When I finally did, the metallic glint caught my breath. Each medal represented something real: long nights, aching muscles, fear, grit, leadership. Not perfection born out of privilege, but strength carved out of struggle. I ran my fingers over them, tracing the edges, remembering where each one came from. The Bronze Star, the commendation for leadership under fire. These weren't decorations. They were pieces of my life, reminders that I had done something that mattered. I sat back, staring at the contrast. The dull, mocking brown of the bridesmaid dress and the dignified gleam of my uniform. The decision came to me slowly, not in anger, but in clarity. Vanessa wanted me to be small, invisible, ridiculous. But I had earned the right to stand tall. She had spent years defining me through her own lens of superiority. Maybe it was time to remind her and everyone else who I really was. I slept little that night. My thoughts kept replaying old moments: her mocking tone when I enlisted, Mom's quiet disappointment, the way Vanessa told her friends I was doing that army thing, as if it were a temporary hobby instead of a calling. I remembered the sand, the sweat, the silence before dawn on deployment, and the faces of those who depended on me. I wasn't some lost girl needing validation. I was a leader, a soldier, a woman who had survived and grown stronger. When the morning light broke, it filled the room with a soft, golden glow. I got up early, the world still quiet outside, and began to prepare. I pulled the uniform from its garment bag, smoothing every crease with practiced precision. The fabric felt familiar beneath my fingers, structured, clean, powerful. I ran a cloth over my boots until they reflected the light like dark glass. Every detail mattered. Every button, every ribbon, every polished stroke was a declaration. I wasn't doing this to spite her. Not entirely. I was doing it for myself. To reclaim my dignity. To show that I didn't need pastel silk or designer lace to be worthy of respect. When I arrived at the venue, the morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses and champagne. Bridesmaids flitted about in their matching pastel gowns, their laughter echoing through the hall. No one noticed me at first, not until I stepped through the doorway, the sound of my boots crisp against the marble floor. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few heads turned, then more. The hush spread like a ripple through the room. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught the sheen of my medals. The green of my uniform stood out against the sea of pale pinks and creams, a color of strength among softness. My posture straightened naturally, back firm, chin high. I didn't need to pretend confidence. I was confident. Vanessa was at the far end of the room, surrounded by makeup artists and photographers. She was the center of attention, her laughter too bright, her smile rehearsed. But when she caught my reflection in the mirror, the laughter died. Her brush froze midair. For a long moment, she just stared, eyes wide, disbelief painted across her perfect face. I saw it all in her expression: shock, fury, and that flicker of something she'd never admit: intimidation. She had spent years trying to outshine me, to make sure I stayed in the shadows. But for the first time, the balance shifted. The photographer glanced at me and whispered something to one of the bridesmaids. A few people smiled, not mocking smiles, but ones tinged with admiration. I stood there, letting the silence stretch, my heart steady. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't out of place. For the first time in a long while, I felt like myself, whole and unshaken. Someone approached me, her future mother-in-law, a woman I'd met only once. Her eyes flicked over my uniform, pausing on my medals. "You served?" she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, keeping my tone calm but warm. Her face softened. "You look extraordinary." It wasn't about vanity, it was about pride, about being seen for who I really was, not the version Vanessa had always tried to reduce me to. Across the room, Vanessa finally turned away from the mirror. Her face was pale, jaw tight, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. I found my place among the other bridesmaids, standing a little apart, my uniform crisp and formal against the sea of soft chiffon. And though I could feel Vanessa's glare burning into my back, I didn't flinch. I had already made peace with my choice. That day, I wasn't just her sister, or her bridesmaid, or her target. I was Captain Ariana, a woman who had fought battles far harsher than sibling rivalry. And I wasn't about to shrink for anyone, not even for her. I hadn't expected to draw that much attention when I decided to wear my uniform, but the moment I entered the reception hall, I realized how drastically the air had changed. The chandeliers sparkled above the tables, and the scent of roses, champagne, and roasted lamb filled the air. Everywhere I looked, people were perfectly styled. Women in gowns that whispered money, men in tailored suits that fit like armor. This was Vanessa's world, elegant, pretentious, tightly wound with appearances. And yet, the instant I walked in, conversations paused mid-sentence. Forks clinked softly against plates before stopping. Faces turned, one after another, their expressions shifting from idle curiosity to admiration. It wasn't just the uniform, it was the story behind it. Her fiancé's family, the Langfords, came from a long line of business magnates, politicians, and socialites. They had never known a day of discomfort or danger, never had to earn respect through sweat or fear. For them, prestige was inherited. But when they saw me, standing tall in my army dress uniform, medals pinned to my chest, I could tell it meant something different. Something earned. Mr. Langford, the patriarch, approached me first. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, he extended his hand with a firm grip. "Captain, is it?" he asked, a note of genuine respect in his tone. "Yes, sir," I said, returning the handshake. "Ariana Brooks, U.S. Army." He smiled almost proudly. "You served overseas?" "Yes, sir. Twice," I replied. "Once in the Middle East, and once in a peacekeeping operation." The people around us leaned in, curious. Vanessa's new mother-in-law, a woman dressed in an elegant shade of champagne silk, clasped her hands together and said, "That's truly remarkable, dear." My brother served back in the day, but none of us in this generation ever had the courage. "You must have seen so much." There was no judgment in her tone, only awe. And as I nodded politely, answering their questions, I could feel Vanessa's gaze burning into me from across the room. She was standing by the dessert table, pretending to laugh at something one of her bridesmaids said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was almost ironic. After years of her trying to paint me as the failure of the family, here I was being treated with a respect she'd never been able to demand, only expect. They asked me about my experiences, about leadership, about courage, about what it was like being a woman in the military. I kept my answers brief and professional, careful not to dominate the conversation, but still honest. I spoke about teamwork, about responsibility, about the bonds that form when you're faced with danger together. Their expressions softened as I spoke. Some even looked humbled. At one point, Mrs. Langford touched my arm lightly. "Your parents must be so proud," she said warmly. I hesitated, just for a moment. My mother had always been proud in her quiet way, but she'd never said it much aloud, especially not in front of Vanessa. I forced a small smile. They are, I said simply. Mr. Langford raised his glass then, his voice carrying easily over the low hum of conversation. A toast, he announced, to the brave young woman serving our country. The clinking of glasses echoed across the hall. I felt my throat tighten, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. It wasn't the kind of attention I'd sought, but it was the kind of recognition I had always silently hoped for. Genuine. Earned. And across the room, Vanessa stood frozen, her painted smile faltering. Her hand gripped her champagne flute, so tightly her knuckles turned white. I caught her eye. For a moment, we just stared at each other, sisters, bound by blood but divided by pride. She looked like she wanted to scream. I smiled instead.
Calm.
Controlled. The way I'd been trained. She started making her way toward me, her gown swishing around her feet like storm clouds gathering. "Ariana," she hissed when she reached me, her voice sharp but quiet enough for only me to hear. "What are you doing?" "Talking," I replied softly, keeping my expression neutral. "Your in-laws asked about my service." "You're stealing the attention," she snapped, her lips barely moving. I tilted my head slightly. "I didn't ask for it." She glared at me, her nostrils flaring. "You could have worn the dress. You didn't have to." "Didn't have to what?" I interrupted gently. "Show up as myself?" Her face flushed, and for a moment, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not just anger, but envy. She was used to being admired for her looks, her charm, her carefully curated perfection. But admiration earned from strength and courage, that was foreign to her. Before she could respond, her new father-in-law called across the room. "Vanessa, your sister was just telling us about her leadership training. Did you know she commanded over 50 soldiers?" All eyes turned toward us again. Vanessa's expression froze mid-scowl. She forced a brittle laugh. "Oh, yes, Ariana's quite the overachiever," she said, her voice thin with strain. But I could see it, the mask cracking, the fury simmering beneath the surface. She tried to redirect attention back to herself, talking about the honeymoon in Italy, the imported flowers, the custom lace of her gown. But the energy had shifted. The Langfords' focus stayed on me, asking about service, about how it felt coming home, about what inspired me to join in the first place. And the more I spoke, the smaller Vanessa seemed to become in that glittering hall. At one point, a young cousin, maybe 16, came up shyly and asked, "Captain, can I take a photo with you? My brother wants to join the army, and he'd think this was the coolest thing ever." I laughed softly and nodded. The flash went off, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vanessa's mouth twitch again, part disbelief, part outrage. It was then I realized that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by her shadow. I wasn't Vanessa's sister. I was Ariana, a woman who had carved her own path, who had faced storms and survived them. As the evening continued, people kept approaching me, not because I was in a uniform, but because I represented something rare in that room: authenticity. Every word of praise made Vanessa shrink further behind her own perfection. When her father-in-law raised his glass once more and repeated, "To the brave young woman serving our country," I met Vanessa's eyes again. Her jaw tightened so much I thought she might crack a tooth. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I just felt free. By the end of the night, the grand ballroom looked like a painting fading at the edges, candles burning low, champagne glasses half empty, laughter turning to tired murmurs. But the energy was unmistakable. Everywhere I went, people smiled, nodding politely or stopping me to say something kind. I could feel eyes following me, not out of gossip or ridicule, but out of respect. Vanessa had spent a year planning this wedding, down to the imported orchids, the hand-lettered invitations, the designer gown that cost more than my Jeep. She'd wanted this to be her crowning moment. But as the night wore on, it became painfully clear that it hadn't gone her way. The moment that truly sealed it came during the speeches. Her husband's best man gave a charming, light-hearted toast. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Langford, her new father-in-law, stood again, glass in hand. "Before we close the night," he said warmly, "I just want to say how honored we are to welcome such an extraordinary family into ours. Vanessa, you looked radiant tonight." I saw Vanessa's face soften, thinking finally, this was her moment. But then he turned toward me. "And to you, Captain Ariana," he continued, "you've reminded us all of what real dedication and courage look like. You carry yourself with quiet strength, and it has been an inspiration to meet you." The applause that followed was polite but genuine. Vanessa's smile froze mid-expression. She laughed a little too loudly afterward, pretending it didn't bother her, but her fingers tightened around her glass until I worried it might shatter. I didn't gloat. I just sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my posture steady. I didn't need the approval. The applause wasn't for me. It was for everything I'd worked for, every moment I'd chosen integrity over pretense. When the band started playing again, people began to relax, dance, and mingle. I stayed near the edge of the room, watching couples spin beneath the soft glow of chandeliers. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to breathe. The chaos, the tension, the years of resentment, it all began to drift away, like smoke dissolving into the air. At one point, Vanessa's new husband, Eric, came over. He was always polite, a little reserved but kind. "I think you made quite an impression tonight," he said with a smile. "I didn't mean to," I replied, sipping my drink. He chuckled. "Maybe not, but you did. My father hasn't stopped talking about you. He said you were the most grounded person he's met in years." I gave a soft, non-committal laugh, but inside, something warm flickered. It wasn't about vanity, it was about being seen for the right reasons. Across the room, I noticed Vanessa pretending to laugh with her bridesmaids, but her eyes darted toward us every few seconds. I could read the storm behind that smile. She was furious, not because I'd embarrassed her, but because she couldn't control the narrative anymore. For once, her version of me, the failure, the plain one, the outsider, didn't fit. When the evening drew to a close, guests began to gather their coats, whispering goodbyes, exchanging hugs. The hall grew quieter, the music slowing to something soft and sentimental. I stood near the doorway, ready to leave, when I felt a hand on my arm. It was Vanessa. Up close, the makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face. Her eyes were glossy, not from tears, but from frustration held in too long. For a fleeting second, I saw the sister I'd grown up with, before the comparisons, before the bitterness. Then her expression hardened again. She leaned in, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You stole my day." The words were sharp, whispered through clenched teeth, trembling with anger. I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye, calm, steady. Then I smiled softly and said, "You try to take my dignity. I guess we're even." For a moment, she just stood there, stunned into silence. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something more, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for her to find the words. I simply turned, adjusted my uniform jacket, and walked toward the exit. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside. The sky was clear, the stars scattered like silver dust. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass doors, the dark green of my uniform, the subtle gleam of the metals pinned against my chest. They caught the light with each step I took, glinting softly, as if reminding me who I truly was. For years, I had let Vanessa define me, the lesser sister, the one who chose the wrong path. I'd carried that weight quietly, always trying to prove myself in ways she would never recognize. But that night, under the glow of those wedding lights, I finally realized I didn't need her recognition. I didn't need her approval. I had already earned my worth. I walked across the parking lot, my boots clicking against the pavement. Each sound echoed with certainty. For once, I wasn't thinking about what Vanessa thought, or what anyone else expected. I was thinking about how far I'd come, from the girl who doubted herself to the woman who stood tall in a room full of people who once looked down on her. The car door clicked shut behind me. As I started the engine, I looked back at the hall through the windshield. Inside, I could still see the shimmer of chandeliers, the fading laughter, the swirl of silk and lace. Somewhere in there, Vanessa was probably fuming, retelling the night in her head, rewriting it to soothe her pride. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the truth was, no one would remember her wedding for the flowers or the vows. They'd remember the bride's sister, the decorated army captain who carried herself with pride and grace. She never forgave me after that. Not for showing up in uniform, not for reminding everyone that strength comes in many forms. But for once, I didn't care. Because that day, I finally stood tall, not as her shadow, but as myself. And that was something no one, not even Vanessa, could ever take away again.